Good morning and welcome to the latest Cross8 webinar. Today we're looking at data, more than just an asset. So delighted to be joined today by a whole panel of experts in this area. Firstly, we've got Gary, Stephen and Parpreet from the team, all that focus as far as data practice. And also delighted to be joined by Kevin Heslop, who until recently was CIO of Sanctuary Housing Group and is now leading Amplified Technology, doing technology advisory and senior leadership consulting. So hopefully we've got a good panel to have a good conversation. Usual sort of format for anybody that have been on our webinars before. So if you do have any questions, please do pop them in the chat. We can see those and we'll try and respond to those through the session. The intention today is to talk a bit about some real world examples and how you can get the most out of thinking about your data. We will send out the actual frameworks and other material supporting it to you on emails and on follow-up. So you will get all that information. We've got the high level sort of data strategy core elements showing on the screen, so I hope you can see that, but we'll send all these diagrams out. Briefly, most of you will probably all already know Cross8, but for anybody who's joining this who haven't met us before, we are a specialist business transformation and commercial optimization consultancy. So we work with a range of organizations to help them deliver large-scale change and transformation and commercially optimized. Right, we're going to get into this. So, hey, Gary, should we kick off with you in terms of, I suppose at a starting point, obviously there's a whole load of dimensions within that data strategy, but how do you go about thinking about it and what's some of the most important ones that you think about when you're going into this?
Okay, then, yeah, so we've been talking about this particular webinar for a fair few weeks, and in relation to the work that we do, data always comes up as a challenge within many of our organisations, or to be fair, in some organisations, they don't think of it at all until it's highlighted as a critical element of their operating model. Now, if data is a critical element of their operating model, you should have a strategy the same way as you'd have a technology strategy, a people strategy, organization strategy, having a good data strategy. Now, I know within this group there'll be lots of different strengths. Now, ultimately, I always go down to the detail, and for me, having a good, strong data architecture and understanding the management of that data and the data life cycle, to me, is really critical. But you don't get that without all the other components of a data strategy. And some of the opportunities that we've had with many of our customers over the past 12 months is about bringing their data to the forefront of their transformation activities. So as I know, if I speak to Mr. Heslop, so from his position, he will probably have a different set of rankings in relation to the importance of the data cake that you can see on the screen. So I'm actually going to hand over to Kevin to actually get his view on it.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I agree with your point about strategy completely. In fact, I think probably the most important piece that's on that diagram about showing all the different components around data, the most important one is the one in the center about having the strategy and existing. Now, I've been in some situations where you talk to a customer, you talk to an organization about data strategy, and the first answer is, yeah, we've got one of them. Yeah, that exists. And if you follow up with the next question, they say, yeah, but also all of your senior stakeholders, they know it, they're familiar with it, they'll be able to talk about it. And then it starts to get a bit woolly. So it isn't just about the thing existing, it's about it being known and being seen and being familiar to lots of people, because data and data strategy is an everybody job. It's not just the CIO job or a particular role. It is an everybody job. So I think let's have the data strategy, but let's get it out there and make it transparent and seen and known to people as well, because that's when it's going to start to get grip around the organization. That's when it's going to start to affect the culture. So you can have a culture around data as well.
I completely agree. And the culture, yeah, so it's underpinning the culture. So as everybody recognise the importance of data, and also speaks the same language. Yeah. And Stephen, I know some of the work that we've been involved with. Yeah, actually getting a clear understanding on the classification and the culture. Yeah, it's been a learning curve.
Yeah, that's right, Gary. And just to pick up on something Kevin mentioned there about the strategy, you can tell how embedded a strategy is within an organization through how strong and effective the governance is. So whenever you're doing anything with data, there ought to be some sort of governance oversight to make sure that the actions you're undertaking are aligned not only to your business requirements, but also to any regulatory environment that sits over the top of that.
Yeah,
completely agree. And I always call it that, and hopefully people who are listening to this, either live or playback, the independent republic of access databases and spreadsheets where where data goes wrong, getting control around the creation of data. And Parpreet, so we're working at the moment with a number of customers where putting those controls in place is really going to add value to the organization. Give us a war story, mate.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, as you probably know, getting data correct at source is the best way, because if you do transformations later on down the line, you lead to poor performance when it comes to your analytical platforms. I think a recent example has been where there was a data strategy in place, but there weren't no clear roles assigned to like an information asset owner. So you could have finance data sitting in one area and finance data sitting in another area, and they're manipulating them in different ways. But also the terminology was different, and that led to inconsistencies down the line. So when you're trying to do a clear dashboard that fits multiple purposes, people are seeing it a different way, reading different things. And when they're going to meetings, they're like, well, no, I'm interpreted like this. No, I mean this. And then that leads to more kind of disagreements, but you're not actually looking at facts because the source data is incorrect at the start. So you need to be agreed. Well, where is the data lineage? Adopting a correct data culture and making sure at the start that we're getting it right at source. So we're not going down the line and having dashboards that are presented, but are leading to more, I guess, erroneous information.
And when you have your data spread all over the place in different user-developed apps and what have you, it becomes extremely difficult to manage your data quality. You need to be able to manage that in a single source, and so you can rely on its integrity.
Yeah, having a single source is essential, knowing where. So if, say it's, for example, a recent client where the failed finance, you think instantly that's within the finance division. No, that's held in operations. But why is it held in operations? And it's understanding where data should be held. So it wouldn't necessarily be finance data goes to finance. It would be maybe operational financial data. So understanding which entities will go to each. So it wouldn't be just bulking the data up in terms of IT data goes to IT and such, but everyone agreeing that this is the source, this is the information asset owner, these are controls in place around that data.
Yeah. So Kevin, so in a previous life, and I think I might have presented to you at numerous times in relation to data improvement. Where so when you're starting on the journey to data improvement, how can we demonstrate it from a business case perspective? How can we demonstrate the importance that a data strategy will bring to an organisation?
Yeah, it's a good question, Gary. So I think some of the early steps aren't necessarily easy to demonstrate because the benefit comes later on. So I just want to continue a little bit of the theme of what Parpreet and Stephen were talking about, but then I'll come on to the bit where we can demonstrate. So the first steps, we were talking a lot about the combination between data governance and ownership and stewardship, and those kind of roles were a lot of what Parpreet and Stephen were talking about. But it links over across into data literacy and culture. So you have to take the time to teach people and educate people and bring them along so they know how to be a good data owner and how to be a steward, what's expected of them, and how to perform the role, because often the role's to the side of a day job. And if you don't give people the information to know how to be a good data owner, it can get squashed by the day job and maybe not get done. So definitely at the outset, don't be in a rush to make easy to demonstrate changes. Take the time to make sure people have learned how to be a data owner and they can understand how to collaborate around the organization and not just have governance, but have good governance and strong ownership. And then the being able to demonstrate comes later. And it could be quite simple because it might just be around the executive table or around the boardroom. It's normal to have data related conversations and it's normal to challenge each other about things like data quality. And that would be something that's demonstrating that the data strategies come to life. Another thing would be that it's normal, as well as producing data and dashboards which are about performance, it's just as normal to look at dashboards which are about data quality and data completeness. And that's another clue that there's an organization with a data culture where data is in the boardroom and the strategy is coming to life. So I think some of it's conversational, some of it's about the level of literacy that the organization has and that they've invested in the people. And some of it's about what kind of data do we look at and how do we challenge each other about it, including the dashboards being about data completeness and quality as well as performance.
No, I completely agree. And one of my favorite tools, and I've used this a lot, when demonstrating the impact of poor data quality, is to actually put a cost to it. So it's from a operational OPEX cost. So this is what poor quality data actually costs you in relation to rework or failed appointments or ordering the incorrect spare parts. Or missing deadlines. So you can quickly start to actually quantify the impact that has on your EBITDA. Equally, you can also see the revenue generating capability as well. Through improved marketing, through improved sales. And we've probably used this with many of our customers, actually quantifying the impact that the data will have. And again, that's always helped me when I'm having to support clients in writing their business cases. Stephen, I know this is something very close to your heart in relation to the impact, the end impact it has on an organization, if your data is not fully up to scratch.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point you raised about the business case. I don't think many business cases factor in a cost of fixing the data that you're predicating your business case on. And you'll know, Gary, we've worked with a client recently where program of asset renewal client wanted to deliver, and that the whole scope of the program was based on the system of record, knowing what assets were there and what needed to be replaced. Well, when we started interrogating the real world, it turned out that a lot of the records in that system of record were actually incorrect. And so the program had to then introduce a whole range of change request management within the program management, and it just increased the scale and complexity of the delivery for the program.
Yep.
No, I completely agree. Sorry, Kevin, you were going to say.
I was going to say on the same point. I think Stephen raises an interesting point because often data gets thought about as an afterthought, and sometimes within those key programs, that's when people start to think about, well, where is the data and what is the data that's affected by this program, and how do we get governance around it in context of that program? And what that actually does is put risk into that delivery of program. I've seen this many times. And if the data approach is pre-existing and it's a day-by-day thing, then it's something that programs work can tap into, rather than needing to do it to say, right, on the defensive, we've got this key, we've got, maybe it's an implementation program, a core system of some kind. It's got a big data requirement, and then you're trying to work out what the data position is. What that means probably is that programs are going to be turning amber or red, right, quite quickly, because data is a bit of an afterthought. Whereas if your approach to data is pre-existing and your governance is a day-by-day thing, you should be then tapping into a network of data owners which can keep your project on green and can keep the data work stream in a healthier place. But it's actually, unfortunately, it's more common at times for it to be that afterthought or only being thought about in the program context rather than the organizational context. I think it's
That's very
an important point.
So
Sorry.
if we take this theme, because I think what's makes these interesting for the audience is sort of those real world examples, and we've started touching a couple because like most of these things, whether it's an IT strategy, a business op model, there's a this is how you should design it. You should have one version of the truth. It should be clean data. You should have all these controls, and yet the reality is we all operate in the real world. So it's really useful to have that as the target, but it'd be useful to get some perspectives in terms of real world where we've seen either ones we worked on or just where we've seen sort of clients needing or organizations needing to tackle their data, but sort of what bits they went after, why they did it, because we very rarely live in sort of the pure world of even though we aspire to get to something in line with the strategy, that they're starting from a blank piece of paper and doing everything perfectly. They're usually stumbling on it, for example, through Stephen, your example with the program data, or some other driver that's caused them to start looking at it in the first place. And then invariably they're going to do so many steps towards trying to improve it, but for different drivers. So I don't know who wants to start on that question.
But I think when it comes to addressing data fixes, Toby, I think it's important to distinguish between data that's owned by the business, so it's a business asset, and data that's owned by an external third party, like a customer or some other legal entity. Because when it's your own data, you're empowered to fix it yourself within the confines you've got as a business. But when the data is actually owned by somebody else, it's a different kettle of fish, and you need to be bound by your GDPR regulations, etc., for example. But the consequences of not addressing it, and this comes back to strategy and governance you were talking about earlier, Kevin, it should be a strategic goal to make sure that all the data that a business either owns or uses is as clean and structured as it can be. And a real world example of a consequence of not addressing known data problems was an automation project I worked on with a client, where the concept was try and automate some manual process of data gathering. And the idea was to use more or less an off-the-shelf solution from a third-party vendor. And it turned out that in order to deal with all of the data quality issues that were inherent in all the legacy systems, a whole load of customization had to be developed within that application. And that took more than a year to develop. And so the implementation of the benefit to the organization of introducing that solution was delayed by over a year. And that had a massive, and the cost of delivery and the customization, it had a huge financial impact on the organization.
Yeah. And the technical debt that was introduced to an organization, because as soon as you start to do customization, that has to do a level of data cleansing. You just know that you're going to inherit a level of technical activity that you're going to have to live with. So so to me, master data management, is key. Making sure you've got that clear understanding of all the data entities, the classification. If you have that embedded in your organization, then that to me is a pivotal pillar of a data strategy.
Real world examples, Gary?
Real world, So real world examples, and we've already called this out. If you don't have a clear understanding of your master data, then it can impact ordering from a logistics perspective. It can impact the maintenance because you haven't got one single source of the truth. I've been in banking clients, where they've struggled with master data, and then that impacted, on their ability to treat some of their customers fairly, which then had a financial regulation impact, and overall. And I spoke about the cost. If you then look at how many people had to touch that data to get it right, to actually go and treat that customer fairly and to appease the regulator, there's a huge cost. And that's because the master data and the discipline around it wasn't in place for this particular element. And I'm always conscious when I'm having these conversations, because I'm always confident in relation to actually making sure that we keep confidential our clients, but that is a particular financial one, and we weren't in there actually doing data. We were doing there mapping customer journeys and understanding the moments of truth. And we found out that some of the pain points were actually down to dodgy data, and then we tracked that back to poor master data management. I nearly swore there. Poor master data management, and by actually fixing that, it means it closed that gap, and there was an immediate benefit to the organisation, and there's definitely an immediate benefit to the customer because she actually met their expectations.
It's also,
I mean,
I think it's
interesting
also
in the
important to
financial.
recognise. Wait, sorry, go on.
I was
just
going to say,
gonna
interesting on the financial services, the bit that's sort of different client, interesting sort of variation on your master data point, because it wasn't bad data, it was just an inability to link all the data. So their customer journeys were impacted, and it's interesting in different sectors. Clearly, financial services, depending on which bit and what scale, it's sort of heavily regulated. So it wasn't necessarily about they were holding bad data. They were just holding data in different sources about different products and different things, which meant they didn't have an integrated customer journey because they didn't understand their master data and how to link to it, which is an interesting sort of variation, I think, in terms of it's not always just have you got good data or bad data, is it out of date? It's sort of your ability to link it together and deduce something from it.
Yeah, and I know this will frustrate Parpreet immensely because Parpreet spends a lot of her time actually creating intelligence. So Power BI are actually doing that analytics. So Parpreet, from the frustration of poor master data, what's your view?
Yeah, I think definitely with past clients, it's easy to say that master data has to be correct source data, but increasingly, the majority of source data is from operational staff, people out on the ground. They're already, in terms of workload, they're overworked. So trying to say, oh, we're going to introduce this because we need to see analytics. So recent examples where we want to see trend analysis on an asset. But this data would then be fed into compliance side of things. So we're looking at net zero. So a lot of organisations are moving towards net zero targets, and how do we report on that? So on these assets counted towards the net zero target, and each of the regions will report differently. And it was easy for me to come across going to support this. We need you to get data from your suppliers in this way on this asset. But at the moment, how much time they had to then make those changes going into, which would give you a little clue on who it is, into the winter period was quite difficult. So it's kind of, well, what can we do for now? So we might have to then have some concessions where we say, okay, how can we do some transformations later on, but then look and do a plan moving forwards on how to correct that data. So everything not for the now, how can we report on now, but still it be auditable, so we can make sure that we are kind of, if someone checks this, that we are correctly reporting for carbon net zero. So I am definitely correct at a source, but increasingly as we're working with clients, it's hard to say correct at source because people are maxed out and saying to them, oh, we're going to do this and increase efficiencies, and later on it'll reduce your workload. But at that moment in time, the initial startup is going to be quite intensive. So it's having that kind of balance of, right, we need to do is putting a plan in place, but also making sure that, yes, we all understand and work towards the same thing and bring the culture on board, but it's a slow progression to get their thinking. But instantly, again, my dream is day one, I go and go, right, let's correct that source going forwards. Everything's nice, everything that, but it never works like that. So, because everyone's overworked, if you have an easy way of doing something, you will go for that easy route and do that. You'll be more efficient and you're trying to get your job done. At the moment, it's data second thought. So it's kind of having that senior management also help you, and pushing that does help in terms of everyone singing off the same hymn sheet. But it's hard to demand, like day one, we need this, all of us to report this. Well, what can we do day one? And then what are the steps in place to improve it going forward?
Yeah.
And we've talked about, so a lot of the things we've focused on there is about the immediate cost to a business of having poorly structured data or no single source of data in terms of existing business processes. But there's also a lost opportunity cost as well. Because to your point, Toby, if you've got customer data that's disparate across a number of different systems and you don't really have an effective single customer view, it becomes very hard then to leverage that information to grow your business. because you don't have a single consistent view of a customer. So there's also that lost opportunity cost as well by having poorly structured data.
Yeah.
I think my customer story or war story, whatever we want to go with, it sort of alludes to a similar point. So a common question, and in this case, if this was a manufacturing organization that I'm doing some work with, their opening statement to me when talking about data was, we don't know where we are to do with data, but we know that we're not where we want to be. So the question started like that, which is not uncommon. So my next question always is, well, why do you know that you're not where you want to be? What are the problems? So we end up talking about the problems, and the problems in this case were to do with our systems aren't integrated. We have to manually, we have to double key things, and there's lots of workarounds. Systems don't seem to be adopted well. So people have, back to what Gary said at the start about access databases and spreadsheets, there was loads of that going on. Because of that, not confidence in performance information, or it takes too long to produce the performance information. By the time it's scraped together, it's not timely, and it's not relied on, not trusted. So there's lots of outcome kind of problems. So having done a little bit of diagnostic work to work out, well, what's at the heart of these problems? In this particular case, lots of it was to do with what I would call lots of the unsexy grunt work that needs to be done under the bonnet to facilitate good data maturity and good data strategy. So they weren't classifying the data. They had no information that classified the data, that said what it was, where it was, what it was for, how long it was to be retained for, whether it's sensitive data, all of that stuff that describes what it is, where it is, why it is, that wasn't existing. As well as that, they hadn't done the data architecture piece and talked about how the data flows and how the data is supposed to flow in the organization and how it maps across the systems. That wasn't existing either. And the life cycle of the data, how long it's kept for, and how it be protected and maintained. Now, this stuff is essential. It's not exciting work, but it's absolutely crucial and crucial to the strategy. For them, for this organization, a big fix was done by creating that work, by putting the effort into creating that work, because all of a sudden they could see the value in the data. Why do we have it? How is it supposed to flow? Why is it important that we adopt using our systems properly and get rid of these spreadsheets? Then all of a sudden it was possible to integrate between systems and get rid of manual workarounds. It was possible to automate the performance data because it wasn't coming from lots of different places. So I would say don't underestimate how important those elements of a data strategy are. The ones that are a bit less visible, but it's the foundational cornerstone stuff. That organization's now on a healthier track, and it was by prioritizing those parts of the strategy.
No, I completely agree. And it's very accurate. And clearly, we're a consultancy, so we have lots of graphics. But this particular one shows the way that we talk about the data strategy. And I know we've worked with you on this, Kevin, and we have a alignment. Each piece of the pie is pivotal. So clearly, some are really important. Yes, so you have to have a strong architecture. You have to have a good data classification, because that's the sort of core of the engine. But that really needs to be underpinned from the governance and the culture perspective. If people recognise the impact and the importance that data has on day-to-day success, then people can get as excited on this particular circle as we do. So for me, my top four will always be sort of architecture, lifecycle management, classification, and culture. So people need to be excited. So they're always my top four. But every element is really important from a data strategy to actually keep the momentum going. Pops, if you had to pick four, what's your four? And clearly they can be the same, because it just makes me feel that that we're aligned. There might be difference.
Mine being master data at source, quality, I guess life cycle, but governance well, because you get the data correct, but then you need the governance around it to make sure that the data stays correct. And as we go into AI, machine learning, we need to get better at holding historical data. But those would be my top four. Definitely master data, without a doubt.
What about you, Kev?
So I would say the central point of the diagram, the strategy itself, that existing, it being known, it being transparent, and being aligned to the organization's objectives, that would be number one. I think that just has to be number one for me. It being up to date as well, so making sure that you take time to sort of measure where you are on the journey as well. So an up to date and transparent, visible strategy would be number one. Number two, I can't get past literacy and culture. Like those things are bolted together. An organization who has got as many people as possible being data literacy creates a culture where data is an important asset, and that brings a strategy to life. So that would be number two. Data governance, where people like they're all linked together, like you said, Gary, data governance, but that data governance being fired up by the data owners and stewards, being trained and their times prioritized to be a good data owner. I would say data governance with people being highly skilled and being good data owners would be number three. And I've got to pick a fourth one. That's quite difficult. We haven't mentioned quality in the context of this yet. Let's say the fourth one would be data quality. But for me in particular, data quality being reported and being seen and just as visible as performance data. That would be the fourth one.
I completely agree. And Mr. Jackson, I
think there's a theme developing here, because I'm going to say that strategy is number one, and then governance, of which I'd see compliance as governance is an enabler of you delivering your compliance regime. Quality, obviously, we've talked a lot about the problems of having poor data quality and the cost of managing that. And then finally, I'd say in terms of future opportunities is the classification element, because if you can't classify your data properly, how are you going to enable AI and machine learning driven solutions? Those are completely predicated on your ability to classify data properly.
I completely agree, and that's probably a bit that we haven't touched on is the analytics benefits. And to be fair, that's probably a webinar in its own right. So Toby, I'll be saying, can we do a webinar on analytics and machine learning? Because you will struggle to be successful in enabling artificial intelligence, machine learning, a subset of artificial intelligence, or any sort of performance and analytical capability, unless you've got a robust data strategy and you've achieved the rest of the slices of this pie. And it's probably worth a discussion. Might be the same people. We'll bring in a few other people to actually talk about analytics, machine learning, and how that's pivotal, to your AI strategy.
So we can build that into the program for next year. That's, that sounds like some really good suggestions. They're probably even those break down further. So that's cool. We're just in the process of putting together that for the next 6 months. So we'll put that out. I guess what would also be interesting, back to this sort of real world thing, because I guess most people facing this are in the real world, either are already dealing with a problem or are wanting to tackle and make some of these benefits, but are trying to get it started. I think we've already touched on this a bit in terms of themes, but I think from personal experience, most of the time that data starts getting traction, where I've seen it, is because it's come from a problem. We've talked about it being a byproduct of something else. It's a program already running, right? It created the to start. So whether that's someone's got operational problems, but actually underlying it, when you do root cause analysis, it's coming down to the quality of data or the access to data or where it's done. Whether someone's doing, even like an ERP change, but actually legacy systems had a level of flexibility with the bad data, where the new systems tighten up, so data starts becoming a problem. To something just the quality of the data inform the program itself, to your sort of asset refresh programs. So a number of those where people have almost stumbled onto data challenges and then started tackling this from a problem bit. I've seen less examples where people have got traction just from wanting to champion data from the start, and quite often the experience I've seen is in some places they're doing it, they've got sponsorship from the exec, which has allowed them to get going, but clearly without a burning platform, much harder to drive engagement of people and get people really locked into this, even though it is absolutely underpins a whole range of different things. I was just interested in your experiences of, possibly that's my JD experience of seeing it more coming from spinning out from something else. Whether that's typically your experiences, whether there's any examples where you've seen someone manage to make really good traction from almost going from without the problem to begin with. So they might have things they want to fix in the data environment, but it wasn't because a problem came to a head that sort of driven that engagement. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Parpreet?
It's transparency. What data gives people is transparency. But the other issue which you touched upon was there was a recent client where everyone is quite built up experience when they're in work and they always can offer an opinion. But when you back it up with data, what data show that our point was actually that's not where the problem is. So where people assumed there was busy periods, it wasn't. There was so data brought that forward, and then that brought engagement into spending money in the data side, addressing data, cleaning it up to do more of that and bringing it to meetings. So backed up by us giving us this opinion, here's the backup of the data. But other times, in majority is transparency, because data brings trust. So when you see something in black and white, rather than people saying, we're doing really well, but we could back it up with these stats. So usually it comes down to transparency, or something's been presented, people have disagreed, and then right, we need to invest in that. So it's usually been kind of those sort of drivers. Or again, as you've just said, going to another system. I have seen that where it's been a finance system going from SAP to JDE, to how they hold data and how the hierarchies are is totally different. So addressing the data there and making sure it's correct.
I agree with Parpreet and Toby's points. I think, and then they can even both link together as well. So Toby, I agree. Often you see a reactive approach to data. There's a situation that requires you to pull your socks up and be in a better data situation. And often ERP, I think it's a good example you gave. The example I would use is also an ERP program that put a completely different demand for data maturity for the organization than where they were before. So there's a step change in maturity that came from a program. I would still say that's a reactive response to your data strategy, but you have a chance to turn it proactive because it's all about what you do after the program. So do you then maintain that level of maturity and take the opportunity to make that step change? Or was it just a once in a moment focus on data and drift away again? So I would always say, and I'm glad to say the example, which is the housing example I'm talking about, the opportunity to stay more mature on data was kept, and then proactively managing data at a better maturity level was something that was kept up. It could have slipped though, and I've seen examples, and I talked to other situations where people have maybe just did a once in a moment in time, pull the socks up and let it drift again. And I think, linking back to Parpreet's point, sometimes in the early days, if you made a maturity step, you need to demonstrate the value of that maturity step. So if it's a new dashboard, or it's the fact that you can be looking at some data in real time that you couldn't before, whatever the output is, that is an outcome of the maturity step, demonstrate it quickly, really show it off to the point that people love it and want to keep it. And that means you're going to then work hard to keep that maturity level because there's a reason to keep it. So I think the two things go together. Show off the things when you're more mature and make people love them because they'll want to keep it there. And don't allow things to drift back and make it a kind of once in a lifetime maturity step, make it a forever one proactively.
Which segues nicely. I was going to say, I really respond to this because it segues beautifully. In fact, almost pre-planned too. We've got a question in the chat asking, what's the panel's views, suggestions on sustainability after taking a refresh / reboot, i.e. prevent repeats of initial root cause? Which I think you partly touched on there already, Kevin. Perfect. Stephen, what's your views?
I think you need to make sure that your data capture systems are fit for purpose, because otherwise you're just going to be reintroducing the errors that you've just cleaned out of your systems. So making sure that those data capture systems are structured correctly with the appropriate sort of controls over them. Again, working with a client, Gary, where at the moment, one of the challenges they've got is that they know that their source data is wrong. But at the moment, there's the method of introducing data into the source system is still prone to introducing data errors. So you need to turn off the tap, as well as remove the plug. So you need to tackle it from both ends. It's not just about dealing with the errors you've got, you need to stop them being introduced.
Yes, I'd probably say use a filter instead of turn off a tap. But controls, I completely agree, Stephen. You need to make sure that from a life cycle management, a data life cycle management, when that data is created, it's right first time. Yeah, and you have the controls in place to do that. But you'll also have, as that data is consumed as part of its journey, that you have the controls in place that actually check it. And then you go back, and then you fix the problem. Because you can do your utmost to actually make sure that your data is created correctly, but there's always going to be the unknown challenge. So it's having the controls in place to actually go and check the quality, that to me is a really important tool.
I agree. I would say we touched on it a little bit earlier, that sort of unsexy grunt work that sits underneath, like your data classifications and your data flows, data lifecycle work. I think those are things that protect you against repeating problems, because doing those things and having the discipline to review them regularly and keep them up to date, so you actually know what your data is, where it is, why it is, how it flows.
Yeah.
Having all of those things and learning from mistakes, and when you have a problem and you do some root cause work, then go back to that work and update it and do it again. By capturing that information properly and capturing it well, that makes your data position more sustainable and more resilient against slipping back to previous levels or previous ways of working.
Yes, I could. Yeah, and culture and governance is the sort of hygiene factor around that. Because if people understand the importance that data has, and they understand the importance of the role that they play, if they create or consume that data, then it brings it up a level in relation to how they can help improve their organisation.
Yeah,
I think the person, apologies, this is anonymous, but to just share it for the rest of the audience. So thanks for the views. Rules in many human elements and behaviours are key too. Learn slash unlearn. I think
that's exactly
that's
exactly the point I was making.
The culture point of
I agree with that comment. I think I can't say enough how I love to see an organisation where they're investing in data literacy. They're putting time in for people to be trained and learn about how being more data literate, especially if someone's got a key role like an owner or a steward. Often that learning, it isn't a big investment. You can use the apprenticeship levy, and you can use so if you're an organisation that's subject to the levy, you can use some of that to put it into training. I think that's what a huge investment to make. So definitely human elements and people learning to be better data stewards, or even just a more data literate member of staff. I think it's a great point.
Yeah, well, we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, Toby. Yeah, the importance of data. In your operating model. It's always the poor child in many organisations, and it shouldn't be, because it is the glue, So why is data? So is data more important than just an asset? Because to me, it's the blood that keeps your organisation working and achieving their goals.
Thank you very much for that, and to your threat of talking about this for hours, but your beautiful synopsis there. Well, we might use our usual format and recognise people probably have further meetings to go to at 12. So we're going to wrap it up at about this point. It's been a brilliant conversation, so thank you. A couple of bits. So as we said at the start, we'll do our usual format in terms of we have frameworks, we have health checks. Clearly those two are fairly interlinked in terms of your ability to assess your current data maturity, and also some things you've put in place. We've got infographics in sort of guide for dummies type approach to different subjects. We've got a whole range of assets. We'll share some of it, but equally, if other people or if anybody wants to access any of that, just let us know. we take the same approach. If you've got the internal capability to do it and all you need is some frameworks, you are more than welcome to have them and use them. Clearly, what we would say is the frameworks are a way of structuring sort of thoughts and making sure you've got a good sort of consistent approach to tackling different problems. It's all about the people that actually go and interpret them and make them happen. So more than happy to share, equally more than happy to support if anybody wants a follow-up conversation. But in terms of this webinar, Gary, Stephen, Parpri, Kevin, thank you very much for all of that. And yeah, if anybody else wants to get in touch, please please do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.